what we believe to be true is the church is doing so many things well, but they aren't doing a lot well when it comes to sex and identity and those kinds of issues. Even when we're not just dealing with LGBT issues as a ministry by far. We're talking about pornography addiction and fornication and adultery. To me, it's sort of sweeping the evangelical church by storm. I mean, a lot of pastors, Christian leaders, churches are beginning to embrace that perspective of celibate gay Christianity.
It is an easy narrative to embrace without the cost of kind of all the blood and mess that comes with. To think that the cross of Jesus couldn't help us make peace with that, and to live out 1 Corinthians 6, such for some of you, is to deny something of the power of the gospel. I have been a follower of Jesus for about 25 years, been married for 20 years, I have 4 boys, 17 to 11, and I'm a senior pastor of Calvary Church in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. I grew up in a Christian home. It was a bit dysfunctional. My father was a good man, but always struggled with addiction and infidelity, and really was never really present in the home. Though we had a safe home and it was secure, and we always had a roof over our head and food and all the things that I'm very grateful for. My mother was an amazing person who had gone through so much in her life that she really did the best she could, and she was always faithful to the Lord to the degree that she could be, and I'm very thankful for her. When I was about 14 or 15, I was pursued and abused by an adult several years older than me, a man, and I'm not sure if that was the moment of the stirrings of same-sex attraction, or if they were already there. But it did begin a journey in which I became split personality-wise, where in one sense, I went to a Christian school, I went to church, I was, smart, winsome, and seemingly fairly faithful. And then the cultivation of this shadow, and the shadow that really this man created and that I embraced. And over the next couple of years, the shadow grew, and it became really the dominant place in which I sought to find my identity and who I was. And I grew up in Southern California, and this was in the early 90s, and just tons of sexual encounters with men, and then I really couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it in my soul, the split, and just the sense of deep shame and hating that this was true. And so I was at once repelled and engrossed by this shadow. So I began to use drugs and alcohol, and that had the benefit of numbing my soul. It also propelled me deeper into shadows. And so really, I would say from the time I was, first sexually abused until the Lord found me at the age of 21, I just spiraled. I did a lifetime of debauchery and sin, and 5 or 6 years. And it was horrible and wonderful. It was alluring and horrendous. And towards the end, I was falling apart just internally in my soul. I was bearing it in my body. And I have two memories. One, who knows if it was drug induced or my personality was breaking, but I was in somebody's house and it was after a drug bender, and I'm laying in somebody's bed. I'm looking up at the ceiling and I see this demon. I don't know, if I knew that, or it was probably that good Christian education. But,
Right.
it was laughing, and I was like, "Why are you laughing?" And it just said, "You're bound." And that's what I was. I was bound. I was bound by this shadow, by these chains that were put on me by somebody else, and my own choices, um, and yet there was a part of me that would continually cry out to the Lord, and no one really knew, except on the edges, just the chaos of addiction, and just the way in which I hurt people and used them. But in the sense of what was really going on, no one knew. The Lord knew. And in June of 1997, I was in my parents' garage, and I hadn't slept in several days, and I was coming down off of crystal meth, and the Lord met me there, and it was, one of the most profound moments of my life. And he didn't visibly show up, but he spoke as clearly as he ever has to me. And he said, "Today you choose between life and death." And I saw death so clearly. Whatever death was going to be, it was going to be horrible. And for the first time in many years, my conscience awoke, and I began to weep. And I saw where I was going, what I'd become. And I cried out to the Lord. And I had a friend who was a pastor, Charlie Contreras, and I called him weekend and said, "I'm done." I'd said I was done about a million times before, and at most, a couple times it lasted a month, 6 weeks. But there was something fundamentally shifting in me, something just so desperate for life, to live in the light, to even though I didn't believe it, I did believe it, that maybe the Lord had something to say, something to do in me. I was so conflicted and broken and hungry and desperate. And during that summer in 1997, I began to, I got sober fairly quickly from drugs and alcohol. The Lord just began to meet me. And I was part of a wonderful church in Southern California. And my friends that I met there, and began to go to a young adult Bible study. And there was nothing, I had nothing. I was broken in every way. And the Lord just began to restore me. And that's been the reason I'm still a Christian 25 years later, is that Jesus has again and again broke in on my behalf. I don't know. I don't understand why, except that I've come to expect that God is on my side, that I'm his friend. And over the first 5 years, I was able to experience not just sobriety and purity, but transformation. So that, a few years in, still dealing with pornography and just, bound to some degree. And I just remember the summer that it broke. And it broke because instead of, just trying to draw some moral lines for the sake of health, I slowly was becoming the kind of person in which I didn't want to look at pornography anymore. I didn't want to be bound in the way that I was bound anymore. And I found something more vital, something more alive than pornography could give me, and that was real people and real relationships. And the Lord freed me, and that's been my, we both, our friend Andy Comiskey, he's the most disciplined person I've ever met in my life.
Yes.
It's like if that was the road that we all had to walk, then I wouldn't be a Christian. I would find another thing to do. And the reason I have any discipline or order in my life is because of the grace and goodness of Jesus that woos me into repentance and gives me the steps to follow Him. And so, as I began to stand, met my wife, and she was the church receptionist, and I made my move and caught her, and we got married. And fairly early on, I graduated from college. I was working at a mutual funds company, and very early on, the Lord began to stir in me and open doors for ministry. I never, in one sense, I always thought about, leading a church or planning a church. But on the other hand, there's a deep part of me that just wants to live a quiet life and be, just do quiet things. And the Lord, He opened doors that led another way. And so I first worked at Desert Stream. I was very thankful for that. I love Andy and Annette so dearly. Still some of the best friends that I have. And then after that, I really felt called to the church, and I became an associate pastor at a large church in Indiana. I was there about 8 or 9 years, and got my master's in divinity during that time, and had 4 kids, and tried to see if how real sturdy that soul was. And we made it, and took a senior pastor position in where I'm at now. I've been here on my 10th year now. And again, my what I know more than anything else is that God intervenes.
Yes.
And that Jesus is good news, and he knows much better than I what will make me satisfied. And when I live into that, and when I expect it from Him, He has yet to fail me. And 25 years in, and I don't. I have vestiges of whispers of same-sex and but I don't really lust. I don't look at pornography. I don't struggle with like, oh my gosh, will I stay sober today? By God's grace, not taking anything for granted. It's solid ground, and that solid ground enables me to raise boys in a really weird world and to help them become men. Solid ground that enables me to be a good gift to my wife.
Yes.
Solid ground that enables me to walk with others that are sexually broken and to lead a church. And God has been gracious to me, Gary.
I love your story, Ron, and the story of your family. And it does, of course, I think whenever I hear someone's story, regardless of what it is, there's always some connect points. Is all of our stories are unique from one another, and yet there can be a theme or two or more that feel very common and connecting, which is one of the values, I think, of sharing our true story. We so often, if we share our quote unquote stories at all in the church, we window dress them so much that they have very little recollection to what actually happened. But it's when we, I think, get more transparent, more vulnerable, that we can really connect, I think, more deeply at a heart level with one another and really support one another. And also it gives hope to those who are currently, like in their own mess and struggling. So I know that was true for me when I got involved in a church and finally got into a men's group that was far from perfect, but it was the best. It was exactly where I needed to be. It was the last place on earth I wanted to be to begin with. But I love what you said too about being a father of boys. I mean, so I'm a father of 2 boys. You're a father of 4, and it's just is so funny to me that that me coming out of the LGBT world and out of homosexuality and struggling with my own masculinity on such a deep level, it almost seemed like God would have given me girls or something, but instead, nope, he gives me boys. And right. Honestly, I couldn't be more thrilled and happy to be their father. But it does, there's a benefit and a beauty in it, in that it calls me up even more, in my own masculinity and in my uprightness before God as a man, to be that good gift, as you mentioned, in my case to Melissa, but also striving to be a good gift to my boys as well. Do you, I'd love to, how long were you did you work for Desert Stream Ministries?
About 2 years.
Okay. And I know you were really instrumental, or I think the primary one that wrote The Men Pursuing Purity. Wasn't that that booklet?
It was.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And we still use that as an 8-week course. I think the electronic PDF is available for that too. But you also have written, I think co-authored and then wrote your own book. Could you just explain each of those books a little bit in terms of, why you wrote them and why they're beneficial? I mean, I've read them and think they're great, but what's your perspective on those books and who would benefit most?
Well, I think they're wonderful too, Gary.
I'm sure.
I think we agree. I think we found solid ground to
absolutely
go forward from. The first one is Compassion Without Compromise: How to Love Your Gay Friends in Grace and Truth. And I think the reason my friend Adam Barr and I wrote that is, for the most part, every person in whom follows Jesus, everybody who is just living in this world is facing a set of questions. Why does sex matter to Jesus?
Yep.
What is God's intention around sexuality? Why is homosexuality not the best expression of human relationships? What does it look like to navigate family and friends who identify as gay or lesbian or transgender, or any of the variety of letters that now exist? And that's the reason we wrote that book. We've been asked by Bethany House to consider writing kind of the next book in that same kind of genre, in light of things have changed so much in the last 5 or 6 years. And but this is it's one of there's still a lot of good in it for people who are just wanting to be good gifts to their sons and daughters and their neighbors and their parents. And then the second book is Hope for the Same-Sex Attracted, and it really is for people who are struggling. And there's so many great things out there that people have written, but the reason I wrote that was just as a way to give an alternative to what is becoming the dominant movement within evangelicalism, which is, I'm gay, I'm celibate, so I'm a gay celibate man or woman, and that what I hope for in life is maybe a good friend or something, but that there's no place for Christ's transformation in the places of our deepest places of our personality and sexuality and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote that, and it's just an attempt to give a hearing for hope. And,
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And actually, you brought up a point I wanted to ask you about as well. And that is that, I often, when I travel and speak and do conferences or whatever, I often will bring along with me Jason Thompson's 1-page PDF on the kind of the 4 views of LGBT in the church. just for the sake of some discussion, just for the sake of one of the things I think is so valuable about that piece, and I know Jason meant it for discussion purposes, not necessarily to pigeonhole people into one place and kind of leave them there, but the idea of being able to kind of understand and have some categories of understanding the kind of wide range of perspective within the church, everything from, full on pro-gay theology and the homosexual union and acts are on par with heterosexuality, et cetera, to, all the way to the other end, which is where Restored Hope Network, which our ministry is a member of, and the two ministries I run, Transforming Congregations for the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church now, but then also the one that Melissa and I founded, Love and Truth Network, that we would be in that far column to the right, which is more transformational ministry, believing that in transformational ministry not being the eradication of all temptation or struggle, but rather the ability to really find new life in Christ and believing that my identity is not in my sexual desires or my emotional desires, but my identity really is rooted in who I am as a man made in God's image first and foremost, and then is in Christ. I wonder, but one of those perspectives, one of those columns that Jason put in that PDF is on celibate gay Christianity. And I often say, and you just mentioned it too, that it seems to be the one category that tends to kind of, to me, it's sort of sweeping the evangelical church by storm. I mean, a lot of pastors, Christian leaders, churches are beginning to embrace that perspective of celibate gay Christianity. And of course, I have some thoughts about that I speak about. But I wonder, do you feel like kind of out of the main categories that are on that PDF, is that the one that you kind of also see as one that a lot of churches are even good, solid biblical churches are grasping hold of out of maybe some confusion? And and I'll ask us a follow up to that in a minute.
Yeah, I do. I think it solves a lot of problems for church. One is that there's been an alignment of quackery with transformation.
Yep.
And so that coupling, which is pretty smart political move on our friends who are who see it as unbiblical, or who desire for the full embrace of the gay identity in the church. It's easy. It's easier for a pastor to say, you know what? That's weird. That's weird. We don't want to be weird. It concocts images in the mind of shock treatments and weird holding sessions and who want no one wants to be a part of that,
right? And
so it solves the problem. I was like, no, you got you come as you are, and you're holding to a faithful ethic that the Bible gives, but there is something here that's good, and we want to embrace the good while holding to a Christian ethic. And I think that is it is an easy narrative to embrace without the cost of kind of all the blood and mess that comes with even thinking, well, could God do anything? Is that God's best in a person's life?
Right. Yeah. To me, it relegates the idea that as long as we are not acting out sexually, or people are not acting out sexually, then as if that alone is the highest call. And what I often talk about is that what we believe our identity to be actually is more foundational and formational to what we think, what we feel, what oftentimes leads to action. Melissa and I have known people that landed firmly in the celibate gay camp that after, and it felt good to them to be there, to be able to identify according to the way they felt, but then, obey the tenets of Scripture around sexual behavior, and they just believed that they'd be celibate because they didn't have any attraction to the opposite sex at that point. And then they met somebody, which is oftentimes, I think, highly promoted in the celibate gay Christian world too. This idea of so-called spiritual friendships, which the name, I love the title of that. I think that's wonderful. Spiritual friendship sounds really good, but it winds up, from my understanding of it and what I've read, it winds up being almost like, marriage without the sex. It winds up being this coupling of a union between two people of the same sex, and emotionally, romantically, pretty much everything that a married couple would experience would be allowed except the sex, which to me is just this, would absolutely be, futility. There's no way that I could engage in that kind of relationship without crossing those boundaries. And so we've known people that have, that after a period of time have left that arena and gone back, gone into basically the pro-gay theology perspective and gotten married or whatever to some of the same gender. So I just, I feel like so often in the church, or when people embrace celibate gay Christianity, it does have a veneer of looking good, and there are some good things about it. There's a lot of things I agree with the authors and the writers and the teachers, but the prescription or the treatment, I guess, or the not treatment, that's not the right word, but the what they propose to be a good solution in the end, I feel like minimizes all that God wants to do and desires to do in us as sons and daughters. And the more that he leads us into to become solid men and women, whether we go on to get married to the opposite gender or we remain single, there's still something about our becoming as men and women that I think is so important, that I believe gets circumvented by this insistence on owning a label that if we were to act on would be sin.
Yeah, Wesley Hill is who I'm most familiar with, and I like Wesley Hill.
Yeah,
he's one of our seminaries that we're associated with. He was hired there, and I think he's bright and brilliant. I think he is a friend of the gospel. I think if you read his book, though, and you see the ways in which he talks about friendships in which he has been connected to, I read it and go, "Oh, buddy, that's not God's best.
Right.
That's you are hungry for something that's never going to give you." And he might be able to hold his ethics, and praise God for that. I'm not sure. I think exactly what you say. I think for many people, it will. It's too near a step to monogamous same-sex relationships.
Right.
And, wink, wink, just, well, that's, that's what, that's not God's best, but it's not, and what's so interesting about it is that the whole premise of gay Christian is, exactly the opposite of what you said, which is, hey, I have these feelings, and those feelings mean something that are, they would say that are good. There's good in there. And I would say, and I think you would say, is that the Bible doesn't talk about, actually never talks about heterosexuality in the sense that we talk about it today, or homosexuality. It talks about our bodies, and it talks that man is for woman and woman is for man. And that is our sexual identity. There's no other conversation. And we make peace with that or not. And to think that the cross of Jesus couldn't help us make peace with that, and to live out 1 Corinthians 6, such were some of you, is to deny something of the power of the gospel, and just is so unfortunate, because I think we, in the time in which the good news of Jesus is most needed, we have lost the story that makes it most relevant.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
Yes. I hadn't even thought about asking you this until now, but and whether we keep this or not, I'm curious about if you have thoughts about the revival that is being purported. Obviously in
Yeah, I
different
think it's so.
universities.
I mean, I think it's so sweet,
Hmm.
and I know nothing about it except what I read, and I know some people who've gone down there. I think it's sweet. I'm so thankful
Hmm.
for any way in which men and women, especially young adults, are seeking and finding the Lord,
Yep.
and how the school is handling it in a way that is contrary to let's sell tickets. And I think that's what we need. We all need uh, to encounter the Lord in such a way that our heart is softened
Yeah.
and we turn towards Him and we lay down lesser things. And yeah, and I think that's exactly
Mm.
how God moves. He moves in a group that, how many people have been praying for revival. It's like, well, do you remember our house, Lord? Do you need the address?
Yes.
And but that's the way He does. He doesn't, there's no formula to it.
Right.
And who knows what it becomes, but it seems to be spreading to other schools, and we need it.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah. No doubt about it. It's true. Ron, what are you, how are you trying to, let me ask it this way, I guess. In, I love the church. God rescued me through the church, my wife as well. I believe that that the church is God's plan A for the world. That I don't believe that, as one who started and runs a parachurch ministry, like, we aren't the answer by any stretch of the by any idea, but we are. But we want to strengthen the church. We want to bless pastors. We want to bless Christian leaders. We want to, in what God has given us, we want to offer back to the church. And in light of that idea, and also what we believe to be true is the church is doing so many things well, but they aren't doing a lot well when it comes to sex and identity and those kinds of issues. Even when we're not just dealing with LGBT issues as a ministry by far. We're talking about pornography addiction and fornication and adultery. Of course, I think pansexuality, or not pansexuality, that polyamory is going to become a much, much bigger thing that we're going to be looking at in the church as well. So, in light of that interest that we have as a ministry, I would love to hear kind of your perspective on kind of where you see the church as a whole in terms of being well equipped or not so much, and how you're kind of navigating your church to be a place that is. We often use the idea of safe but also transformational. We want both of those things. And again, the reason we named our ministry Love and Truth Network is because if you pull one out of the other, if you take truth away from love, it's no longer love. Actually, it might feel kind of like a smarmy sort of, or in the moment it might feel nice and loving and affirming, but in the end it leaves us without the truth, which isn't love. And then if you pull love out of truth, then it's just this thumping legalistic truth rant. What are your perspectives, and where do you see the church, and what do you feel like God's called you to do to make changes in your own congregation?
Yeah, I think overall, I think very few churches have been able to create a space for. I was talking to a young man. I call it the old magic, and the idea that there is a power, and there is a king who can do amazing things.
Mm-hmm.
And this, it has to do with, of course, sexuality, but I think the church in many ways has lost the ability to create spaces in which people can be themselves. There is no transformation without reality.
Right.
And reality requires trust and safety and risk. And then something has to happen. It can't just be, blah. I know a lot of people who do that, who speak very truthfully about themselves in pagan relationships.
Right.
But they feel accepted, but there is no pathway in which you could become something different. And that's really my whole everything that I do since I've been a leader is how do I create spaces that one is enable people to be themselves, laying down the facade of religion or professional, upper middle class or middle class church professionals, successful people. These people, they're not falling over they're not cracked at the seams at every level. They seem professional, but in truth, the same level of brokenness as every other area of human life or strata of society. And can we be honest? And can we be honest with one another? And then can we enter into spaces for healing or transformation? And so that's what I try to do. I don't know how successful I am, but we, just again and again, the kingdom is here. The kingdom of God changes everything, and anyone who's in that kingdom will experience power and authority and transformation that changes everything, including one's sexuality and their bent. And then, I as doors open, I go to churches and speak when I'm asked to, and I primarily feel called to my church and to my congregation, but I write and as opportunities arise and speak and talk to friends like you, and just trying to be faithful and to be authentic about my own journey. And I try to make a space in which people can follow after me to Jesus. That it's okay. You can be who you are with what you're dealing with and what is happening, and Jesus is King. And I just, I have numerous examples throughout my time here. People who have taken me up on my offer, from millionaires to college kids to, perfect little couples with deep, dark secrets to those who've been ostracized. And I love that. I love it a lot.
What would you say to pastors watching this? If a pastor is watching, and I know every pastor is going to be coming from a different perspective. From their own personal background, everything from maybe dealing with their own current porn addiction, or maybe a former addiction or use, maybe some other area of struggle, substance, emotional dependency, whatever the case could be, and so they're listening to this, watching this from their own personal perspective, but then also as they're in leadership and trying, I think, oftentimes to navigate the sense of expectations that have been put on them, maybe by the elder board or however the church is governed. There's a lot to try to navigate there, I think. But what would you say to pastors who do recognize their own personal need for deeper life in Christ, deeper freedom from the things that so easily entangle us, as Hebrews says, but also in terms of leading a congregation, they have a heart to shepherd and to guide those in their care. What would you say to them in those two perspectives, personal and more corporate?
Yeah, I think three things. One is that to the degree that you as a pastor go on your own journey in appropriate ways with people you trust, will be the degree in which your church can experience and have wells of mercy. If you're not willing to find them or risk to get them, then those wells are stopped up by you. And, one of the things I see with people is, no pastor wants their ministry to be a job. But when push comes to shove, sometimes it's like, well, I'm afraid of what will happen to my job.
Right.
Well, there's no job that's worth the hell of no water, and so that, just the grace of knowing that Jesus got you here, he can get you through it. And if you don't have people around you, you can take good steps of reaching out to people like Garry and um, to find a way to give voice to what's happening and to believe that God has a way for you. And that's good news.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the big blowups of moral failing that we see, they happen not because, they did everything they could to find mercy and just couldn't find it. It's that in the places in which God was willing and ready to give mercy without blowing up the whole thing, they didn't take it because they were afraid or ashamed. And then I think that God will give pastors, we have to be very mindful of the broken around us who set up appointments to talk and who interact with us on Sunday mornings. I'm always on the lookout. And I think every pastor should have one or two or three, whether it's, somebody dealing with same-sex attraction or drugs or pornography or, something that is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And to be with somebody in that, to cultivate a well. And as they get better, they should be sent out to minister and to cultivate wells of their own. And then I think that's where ministries like yours, Garry, really matter. Not every, we're all broken, but some of us quite, more broken than others. And for some pastors, like, I want to have a healing space. I want people to drink deeply from the well, but I don't quite have the experience or knowledge, or I don't personally understand it. Well, that's where ministries like Garry's are fundamentally important, because they help us create what is necessary with people who understand it and who are wise and who have the history of redemption behind them, and they can be trusted and help us create what we maybe couldn't do on our own. And that's a great gift of the world we live in today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you, what's a way that pastors or others that are interested, maybe after reading your book or books, or, just out of, maybe they've not done any of that, but they hear you and they resonate with what you're saying and they would love to contact you? What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Sure. They can go to my website, Ron Citlau, RONCITLAU.com. And you can contact me through that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Anything, any remaining things, Ron, at all that are on your heart that you would want to say?
No, I'm just so thankful for you, Garry. And what I know is true is that there are countless people who have been touched by Jesus and his gospel, who are quietly living their lives of holiness and, living lives of fearing the Lord and finding the wide open spaces of grace. And it just isn't true that we don't exist and that God isn't doing it. God keeps moving, whether it gets on the news or not.
Yes.
And whether, he has allies in every evangelical organization or not. And so have hope, everyone who needs hope, and be encouraged. It's good news. And every person who takes Jesus up on his offer becomes a living epistle of what the gospel does.
Yes.
And we need you. We need your life, not just your politics or your theology, but your life.
Yes.
Because your life is a witness to what Jesus is doing.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thanks, Ron. I so appreciate you being willing to join us, and appreciate your wisdom and just being vulnerable and transparent. I love what you said earlier about you talked about reality. Change happens in the context of reality. Our transformation doesn't happen outside of the context of reality. So such an important thing to remember. We can't just bring 20% of us, or 25%, or 50%, or even 80% of us, into the light. We need to bring the whole thing, the good, the bad, the ugly. And that's where Jesus meets us, is when we have that open and full offering. So, all right. Well, bless you.
Bless you, brother.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Love and Truth Network podcast. To listen to or watch future episodes, please check us out at loveandtruthnetwork.com/podcast. Also, you can subscribe to Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future episode.